Welcome to Debug Diaries by CSE, a podcast where we dive into the world of technology with some of the most influential minds shaping its landscape. Join us as we explore the past, navigate the present, and envision the future of innovation and technology. Today, we are here with a pioneering individual in Sri Lanka's technical landscape, and he is none other than Professor Gihan, who was instrumental in setting up the first email system and internet network in Sri Lanka. In this episode, we will dive deep into the professional life of this remarkable individual. Good morning, Professor Dias.
Good morning, Ovindu.
Really excited to have you on the podcast today. Before we start, I would like to say we all are really inspired by you. And I remember one of the first few days when I came into CSE as well, I remember seeing you walking along the corridors and telling my friends, wow, that is Professor Gihan Dias, and telling about the things that I've heard you have done. So we all know about Professor Gihan Dias, but in your words, could you describe Professor Gihan Dias?
Right. That's a bit of a difficult thing, but I believe I can say I'm an engineer. I am very proud of that fact. And I also want to mention that my father was an engineer. Actually, he was a civil engineer. He worked in the Ceylon Transport Board, CTB or SLTB, for a long time. And in fact, many of the bus depots around the country, actually he was responsible for that. So I was inspired by that and the fact what engineers do. So engineers build things, as opposed to other people who might just take what other people have done and use it in some particular way. So I believe I'm an engineer, and of course I was fortunate enough to get into Moratuwa. Of course at that time there was nothing called computer science, so I got into university in 1981. But even before that I was very much interested in computing, and I found a book called Programming in Basic. This should have been 1970 something, and I thought this is a great thing, but of course I didn't know computer at that time. So I had the book, I was reading it and learning from it, but of course I never had a computer to run it on. Then just after my A level in 1979, they said there is a computer class in Colombo, and it was one of the first computer classes ever offered in Sri Lanka. So I thought I will go for that, and so I learned, I think, basic in that, and it was very, very interesting. Then when I came to the university, of course there was no computer science, but I decided to try to follow electronics and telecom engineering, and which I did. But from then I was interested in building things, and so I believe for whatever reason after I graduated I decided to join the department. I'll talk about that later, but if I hadn't done that, I'm sure I would have worked in some organization doing engineering. But even while being an academic or while doing like lectures and so on, I continue to try to build things, and that is what you can basically say about me. I try to see where there is a gap, something which needs to be done or can improve the life of our people, and how do I do that. So I continue to do that and have been doing that from the beginning.
Thank you, sir. So I think Professor Gihan's achievements are testament to his philosophy of building things. And one of the things that you built or helped build was the internet in Sri Lanka. So the early days of the internet was around the 1980s. And in your opinion, could you give us a bit of an introduction to the internet in Sri Lanka?
Right. So this university was very much, as you know, it still is a technical university. And so one of the things we saw in the early 1980s when I was a student or instructor just after I had graduated was this concept of computer networks, where computers can talk to each other, and I was fascinated by that, as well as Professor Induru, at that time Dr. Induru, and several other people like Professor Dayavans and so on. So we came up with a proposal to set up a network in Moratuwa. So we submitted that proposal to various places. Unfortunately, we didn't get any money, so that sort of died there. And then in 1986, I went to USA, to California, to do my postgraduate studies, and there I discovered something called the internet. So it was running at that time, and it was incredible because I can sit in a lab in front of a computer. So those days we had these Sun computers, and we can send a message and it will get to anywhere in the world like in a few minutes. In fact, you can chat. So you can type things on the computer, and then and there it was available, and it was incredible because we were never used to that type of thing. And then we thought, can we make this technology available to people in Sri Lanka? So that was one of the things I was doing. So of course I first finished my PhD, but even while doing my PhD, we set up a system to bring email to Sri Lanka. This was in about 1988, and so the first email system was somewhere in that corner of the building, and it connected not only this university but several other universities as well as some other organizations, and it started running. I think we started in 88, but by about 1990 it was running fairly reliably. But of course it was not internet, it was only the email system which we had at that time.
Right. So when we are speaking about the initial email system, we also must talk about your work with the LK domain registry.
Right.
So could you elaborate a bit about that as well?
Okay. So when I was in the US, I saw that to send an email, you had to have two things: the name, like maybe Gihan, and then there is this famous @ sign, which has become the trademark of email, and then something called a domain. So I was at the University of California, Davis, and it was ucdavis.edu. But then I saw that some universities, say in the United Kingdom, were having addresses ending in UK, and so I studied it and found that there is a top level domain reserved for every country. So the person who was handling it is a person called John Postel, who was at the company which was handling that, and I wrote to him and said, we are setting up this academic network in Sri Lanka. We want to use ac.lk, can you allow us to use that? And then he just sent a reply back saying, okay, you got LK. It was just very, I mean, I still have that email. I didn't even actually ask for the entire country, I just said we want to do the academic network. But, and of course at that time nobody bothered about it, since very, very few people used email, and internet was still only concentrated on universities, so it had hardly got beyond that. So anyway, it was there, and in about 1990, in fact I think it was June 1990 that we got that domain set up, we started using it for our email system. So it was just by, well, I wouldn't say mistake, but because I was in the field and I talked to the correct person, and at that time nobody bothered about these domain names, it was assigned. But of course I would like to say that once you have something, then of course it's up to you to manage it in a proper way. So then eventually we did set up the structures to manage it in a proper way. So we were earlier running through this organization called SINTEC, Computer and Information Technology Council of Sri Lanka, and then after that we set it up as a separate organization. So that's a long story, we'll talk about that maybe some other time, but that's how it happened.
That is a great story, and
Right.
to know how the domains that we use today were
Yes.
initiated by you in about 30 to 40 years ago.
Yes.
So Another contribution that you are known with making is the development of Sinhala language in technology. And what was the motivation behind these efforts, and what are some significant milestones in this technological evolution?
Right. So this also came from internet. So we were using internet here at Moratuwa. Now this is not a problem because everybody at Moratuwa speaks English because our medium of instruction is English. So there was no problem using English to send messages or whatever it is. But if you go to other universities like the arts faculties and so on, and also the general public, they don't use or they are not familiar with English. They don't like to use English. So we said, let's try to build the internet and have some instructions for using internet in Sinhala. So it sounded fairly simple. So I went and met Mr. Nandasara, who is at the University of Colombo School of Computing, and asked him, because he was handling that area, Mr. Nandasara, I want to set up a help for telling people how to get on the internet, what is it about, right? All that in Sinhala and also Tamil. Can you help us to set this up? He said, okay, yes, there is something called Unicode and you should use that, but we are working on that topic, but it's not quite ready yet, and but we can give it to you. So then I said, okay, fine, you are going to give it to us. And of course, Professor Samaranayaka was the head of that institute. I spoke to him. He said, yes, he can give it to us. But unfortunately, after several months, it was not yet ready. So then we said, okay, now if it's not there, how can we make it happen? So myself, Mr. Hassa Vijayavardhana, Dr. Ruwan Veerasinghe, and several other people from UCSC as well as I think Peradeniya and some other places, we decided we have to figure out, and also Mr. Vasantha Deshapriya, who used to be secretary to the Ministry of Technology and now is retired, people like that, we decided, okay, let's get together and figure out how we can, the initial question was how we can set up a web page to help people to use the internet in Sinhala. But then we realized it's not only just one web page, documents, emails, and of course at that time there was nothing called WhatsApp or anything, but all those, Facebook, all those were completely not there, right? Remember that. Even Google was just about starting around that time. There were other things. We basically figured out what to do. Then we realized that although this Unicode is defined, it doesn't clearly explain how to write a particular Sinhala letter. So we need to be more specific. So actually we got together with the Sri Lanka Standards Institute, SLSI, because they are responsible for setting the standards for everything in Sri Lanka. So if you buy even water, right? If you buy some water bottle, it must have the SLS mark on it, right? It says it's according to a standard. If you buy anything, right, milk or anything, it must have a SLS mark. So even for this Unicode, we said it should follow the Sri Lanka standards. So we talked to them and they were very agreeable, and we came up with a standard and we wrote everything, and they published it as Sri Lanka Standard 1134. That is the standard for encoding of Sinhala. Then after that we had another one, 1326, which is the standard for encoding Tamil, because although we thought Tamil they would have done it in India, but they were not yet ready. They didn't want to do it. I mean, they were running around, but they didn't. So we did the Tamil also well before India, and we published that. Then of course the other problem is, so at that time of course phones were, there were nothing called smartphones. They had these Nokia phones, but mostly it was Microsoft and Windows. So we talked to Microsoft, how can we put Windows in Sinhala, and actually they worked with us. They took our code, and they included it, the keyboard, everything, and they did it. We also talked to, or at least Nokia contacted us and got some help to get Sinhala. In fact, even the small Nokia phones, even I think the current ones do support Sinhala. And this was before Android and Google and all that really got started, and we managed to see that happen. So by the time, of course, the phones got popular and Android and iPhones became popular, things were fairly under control, and they managed to set it up without any problem. But at that time, I'm talking of early 2000s, I would say, it was a big task, because these companies, the American companies, they don't want to spend a lot of effort on Sinhala, right? For them it's a tiny little thing, so they say, okay, we've got English working, that's fine, we've got French, and we've got Chinese, and we've got Russian, okay, those are fine, let's do Hindi also, right? They said we've got Hindi, and they say Sinhala. Sinhala is the same as Hindi, right? So you can use the same Hindi one. That is their attitude, that we have got Hindi and you just Sinhala, to us it's the same, right? So you just use it. So we have to fight with them a lot, and we had people like Professor J.B. Disanayaka, who we had to send to these various places to go and shout at them and explain to them why Sinhala is not the same as Hindi. So I'm sure you have seen him, he comes on TV fairly often, so he's very good at explaining these things. So we got this done, and this would have been in the early 2000s, and so still what we have done is used. So each time you send a WhatsApp message or a Facebook post, or you write a web page, or you do TikTok or whatever you are doing, and you are using Sinhala, you are using Unicode, because none of these applications, TikTok, WhatsApp, Google, anything, support anything other than than Unicode. So now everybody supports it, but of course at that time it was a very strenuous task. Of course now you guys just see, okay, you open the phone and everything comes, and you don't really see a problem, but it took a lot of effort to get to that stage.
That is truly a fascinating story.
Right.
And as you mentioned, those days there was no Google. So nowadays we've just gotten used to asking anything we want from the likes of ChatGPT,
Yes.
or even before, a few years before, we would just type whatever we want on Google and someone would have answered it on Stack Overflow. But in your time, none of those were available.
Exactly, right.
So how were you able to get these things done?
Yeah, so remember, just before we started, the only way if you wanted to get some information from outside is you could call them, which was very, very expensive, or you can send them an airmail letter in a blue envelope, right? And it takes 2 weeks for the letter to get there, 2 weeks to get a reply. So that's how you got it. Of course, what we did in 1990 is to get this email working, which meant that we could send messages out and get replies back. So I think that was fundamental to getting things done. Then of course there were other things which came before these search engines like Google. There was something called Archie, there was something, okay, there were several things which you could use to get information. And of course after that we had the World Wide Web, which sort of became popular maybe around 1990 something. So we could use those. So remember, even we are now used to searching on Google, but before Google there were several other search engines. Google came a bit later, but of course they managed to sort of take over that business. Of course now we see OpenAI and similar companies, probably they will, I don't know, they will do whatever they are doing. So yes, so the situation there was quite different, where we had to send messages and have human beings reply.
That is truly
Yes.
inspiring, how you managed to get things done despite of the lack of technology
Yes.
at that time. So moving on to your academic life. So you were one of the first members of academia in the CS department of the University of Moratuwa. Can you explain a few points about the early days of CSE.
Right. So actually, I want to proudly say I am the first employee of the CSE department because at that time there was a head, Dr. Indurua, but he was appointed as head, but he was actually his main appointment was in the Department of Electrical Engineering. And then we had some people, Mr. Gamini and several other people who were working in the computer center, but they were all also working for the electrical engineering department. So after the department was set up in 1985, I was the first person to join as a temporary instructor first, and then after that as a probationary lecturer. So I was both the first temporary staff member as well as the first permanent staff member of the department, because everybody else was in a different department and they got transferred later. Anyway, so at that time when we started, of course we had no students, so we were just setting up the systems, and so of course we had punch card systems, and then after that we got our first interactive things with keyboards. These were called microcomputers. We had several of them. We had something called a TRS-80. I think some of them are still there in our museum. We can have a look at them. Then we had some Japanese machine called SWORD, which we used for a while, and then after that we got a Digital Equipment Corporation computer. So those were what we were using at that time. And then of course I left to my PhD, and then at about the same time that we got the first students coming in, I think in about 1987 or so, and I was not there at that time. So the first met the students of the department when I came back after my PhD in about 1992, and at that time there were, I think the first two batches were in the department, and of course some of them are still here as staff members, and I think you will be talking to them as well, so I won't try to repeat that. But of course at that time the department was very small. We had, the first batch had only 16 students. The staff was like Dr. Indura, myself, then we had Dr. Sada Vijay Somu, who unfortunately passed away some time ago, and several other people who were like lecturers and so on. Then we had Mr. Adams, the systems engineer. So it's a very, very small set of people and a small number of students. And of course we didn't have all the facilities we have right now. The department was very small, and however we did manage, and I'm happy to say that especially the first batch who came, they are doing very well. Several of them are in the department, others are working in industry or in other universities or research institutes, and they are all doing very well, I would say. And then following that, the next few batches also, they really benefited from what the department could give them. I want to also mention at the beginning, so maybe I just go back a bit and talk about the early 1980s. Why was this department started, right? Because the government realized that this thing called computing is coming up, and before that there were no computers. As I said, I first studied basic programming and I didn't have a computer, so it was sort of momentous event to actually go and see a computer. So the government said we have to bring this country into the computer age, and to do that we must start courses in computer science. So they started in several places at Colombo, Moratuwa, Ruhuna, and several other places as well, and they decided to give some money to set up departments of computer science. But we said, our department, our university, that okay, we have a faculty of engineering, we don't have a science faculty, so therefore we don't want to set up a department of computer science. We called it the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. So we were the first department in the country to have a name like that. Now, of course, there are others, and so we set up that, and at that time we thought that our main focus will be on computer hardware, networking and so on. But by the early 1990s, we found that the software industry was coming up and there was a huge demand for programmers. So we shifted, and from maybe the second or third batch or somewhere like that, we started teaching a lot on programming concepts, algorithms, data structures, programming, and so at that time there was no Python, right? There was no, so basically it was languages like C, Pascal, famous Pascal, which we learned those days, and so on. So I think would say that I was one of the people who helped to get this software and that type of knowledge into the department and make sure that our students were well sought after in industry. And from that day, from the first batch itself, the industry has been coming and looking for our students, right? We don't have to really go behind companies asking for jobs. They come to us and ask for employees, and that has been the way, because we look at what the industry requires and we produce them. So as you know, now we are shifting more towards data science, machine learning and so on, because that's what is needed in this world. But of course, it doesn't mean we are going to stop computer science. No, that goes on, because the industry says no, we want a lot of computer science people, that they are the fundamental people who run these companies. So we also do that, but we've also had some other things. So that's, I think, the beginning of the department and how it started. And of course, we started with 16 students, and now I think we have about more than almost 400 students that we take every year.
Yes, that is great knowledge that we probably did not have about how the humble beginnings of CSC, right, and how it emerged as one of the leading, if not the leading, computer science course in the island. So let's take a step back into the 1980s, when the internet was just booming and when you were starting this email system and the computer networks. Did you imagine, how did you imagine the next 40 years, and do you think that we have overachieved or maybe underachieved your vision for 2025?
Right. So actually, I never thought so far. I mean, always, so maybe it's bad for me, but I was always trying to do something which is required then and there, rather than saying, okay, we might need something in 20 years and therefore let's try to build that. We were always trying to do things which were solving problems which were already there. So I think these things like artificial intelligence and so on, we never really thought about at that point, although they have become so major now. But still, I believe what we started in looking at the fundamentals of computer science is still very, very much relevant, because they will never go away, right? You can have any amount of machine learning and whatever, but they have to build on the fundamentals. So I believe I never really, so it's not to say, okay, in 1985 I imagine that in 2025 we will have this. No, I mean, I have never thought that way, and also even right today. So we are now in 2025. Now let's not go too far, let's go to 2035, right? What will we having? It's very difficult to say. So one of the famous people who tried to predict the future was Arthur C. Clarke. He wrote a lot of books about the future. In none of his books is there a mobile phone. He never thought of that. Or if you go through all these books, all the phones were in one place. So even, well, of course, if the spacecraft or something, there was some communication in the phone, but there was nothing where people just carry a small device in their hands. So it's very difficult. In fact, if you look at all the science fiction written before maybe the 1980s, nobody really imagined that that would come. Of course, things like AI have been forecast, but it's very difficult. So I try not to think too far. I always try to think what can we build now which will solve problems we have either now or next year or maybe in 2 years time, rather than trying to do things which will be try to predict what might happen 10 years in the future.
So yes, that is very true, and predicting the future is very difficult in today's rapidly evolving technological landscape. So you lived in a time where you were emerging in a time where the internet was emerging as a disruptor of the way we live. And we could say similarly, there's a parallel in today's environment where AI seems to be disrupting all the lifestyle that we built.
Right.
So how would you tell students, so what should you focus on? How do you balance mastering the fundamentals, as you mentioned, or discovering new trends? What would be the balance that a student should strike?
Yeah. I believe as a student, as an undergraduate especially, maybe it's different for a postgraduate student, you should always know the fundamentals. If you go to a company and ask them what type of employee they want, they will always say, I want people who know the fundamentals, who know the theory, right? So I will remember, this was maybe in 1990 or something. Some guy came and asked me, what programming language do you teach? So at that time we were teaching Pascal. So I said, no, we were teaching Pascal. Oh, that's a very old fashioned language. In our institute, this is not even a university, some kind of institute. We teach Java, right? That is the most modern language. But now you look at it, I mean, still Java is there, but it's, not very, I would say, the most popular language. So we always say we are not going to produce students who can do whatever is the latest thing that companies want. Sometimes companies come and complain, you have not taught students this particular technology which we are using. I said, well, if you are using that particular technology, you had better do some training and get them there. We teach people how to do the fundamentals. That is always there. Now, if you take machine learning, data science, still there are fundamentals to that. I mean, you don't need to know exactly how ChatGPT works. I mean, yes, maybe that's important, but as a computer science or a student of this department, it's what you need is what is the basis behind which all these things work, because always they are based on data. So what is this data they are based on? How does it work? How does it take data and convert it into something else, right? And what techniques will be valid today and valid in 10 years time? What techniques will be used today but may be completely obsolete in 10 years time? So students should know this, right? If you only know whatever techniques are the most popular today, you will become obsolescent in 5 years time, because that technology will go away and something new will come. But if you know the fundamentals, you just pick it up and then read a few articles here and there, watch a few videos, and then you can pick up whatever it is.
That is very interesting, sir. And as you mentioned, as someone who has stayed in touch with the rapidly evolving technologies in today's day and age, any routines that you developed in your early life that have helped you to be successful throughout the years through many changing technological evolutions?
Yeah, so I don't know, what works for me might not really work for someone else, but I have always tried to understand what happens, try to see what is behind things, and read a lot. So I am very disappointed, I would say, when I talk to my students. I ask them, okay, did you hear this news about this new product from Google, Microsoft, whatever it is? and they look very blank. Come on, it's there. You can just go to various sites and you can subscribe to lists or alerts or whatever you want, and it will tell you, right? Why are you not getting those alerts onto your phone, right? Why don't you know what is the latest thing which is happening, right? So I think one of the important things is to, I mean, you can get them to send you alerts, or you can go to a couple of websites and just read about them, figure out what is happening, right? What these various companies are doing, and then try to relate it to whatever it is that you are doing. So I mean, some company might announce some new product, right? And remember, I mean, people are talking of quantum computers, right? So what do computers do now? Well, they can sort of barely add two numbers together, right? In 10 years time, maybe they can add, you know, slightly bigger numbers together or something like that, right? So it's difficult to see whether quantum computing will actually become successful or not. Then of course there's also this hype like blockchain, right? So blockchain, I mean, it's a very simple computer science concept, which you should all know, right? You should study the theory, but 90% of blockchain is just nonsense, right? I mean, the theory is very good. Theory is basically there. Nothing wrong with the theory. It's very sound. But beyond that, people are just trying to make money by, you know, showing people that I don't know, whatever it is, Bitcoin or something, right? So you should know the difference between the fundamentals and stupid things like Bitcoin, which is, you know, going to, I mean, a lot of people will lose money and a few people will make money out of Bitcoin. That's taken for granted. I mean, that's obviously going to happen. And Ethereum or anything else that these guys will come up with. Yeah, so basically what I would say is keep abreast of what is happening, try to understand what is important, and of course you can't know everything, but at the same time be aware of everything, right? You know, what are these physicists talking about? What is the latest theory behind black holes or something? I mean, it's not matter to you, but at least you should be somewhat aware, right? Be aware of what is economics, right? You know, because everything works on economics. So do you understand how these economic theories work, and you know how inflation will happen or whatever it is? A lot of people don't really understand. They think that you know, somehow money comes from nowhere. No, somebody has to do work to get money. So that is economics. So you should learn many of these. So whatever you study in here as well as other places, but be technically up to date as well.
That is some great advice for all of us, sir. So moving on to the last question. It is a bit of an interesting one. So my question to you is, sir, just like the young Gihan Dias in the 1980s helped pioneer the internet in Sri Lanka, do you see there being a similar significant figure? And if so, in what field would this figure emerge?
Okay, that's a difficult question. So I don't know. I'm sure there are very significant figures in every field. But let's take our field, computer, IT, whatever, right? So the one good or bad, I don't know, one feature is that this field keeps on changing rapidly. So it's not like, for example, if you are studying archaeology or something, right? You know, archaeology, well, it's there, right? The same, whatever pyramids have been there for thousands of years, and you know, they will not change. Of course, there may be the technology to study pyramids might change. Okay, can you repeat the question again?
So the question was, do you believe that there would be a similar significant figure, and if so, what field it would be from?
So I'm sure there, as I said, I'm sure there will be many significant figures, but in this field, yes, there is room for not one, but many people to show what they can do. So what exactly you can figure out. You can do a startup, you can work in academia and do some research and make a new discovery, you can do many things, but I will tell you two things. One is, if you want to succeed, one is hard work. I mean, you have to keep on working on it. It doesn't mean that you have to, do physical hard work, but yeah, you have to keep at it. And very, very important is team building, right? If you try to do something by yourself, you will not succeed. Why? Because then everybody else will be against you and they will be trying to stop you from doing it. But if you build a team and let the team work and you sort of support the team to do well, then so the entire team is behind the idea, and they are working on it, and it's not just you, it's a team. So I think those two, teamwork, hard work, will help you. So definitely every person, I can't point and say it's this person, and whether that person is in academia or industry or maybe even the government, who knows, or in an NGO, it can be anywhere, but there are challenges, and anybody who tries to overcome the challenges and build something which is useful, I think will be known as a successful person.
So thank you, sir, for that excellent advice, and it was really great having you, and we all can learn so much from great people such as yourself. So once again, thank you so much for being with us here on this podcast, and we hope, I'm sure that our audience has learned a lot from your story here today.
Right.
So, and also to our audience, we thank you so much for being with us, and we hope to see you again on another episode of Debug Diaries by CSE. Thank you.